My name is Robin Henry Tees, and this was me and my earthly father when I was 12 years old. I played for a baseball team called the Holy Terrors.
And they had another day to go back, and then it took them a third day to find Jesus. 3 days looking for him. I imagine at this point, if you will, as Joseph and Mary went around to the caravan looking at the relatives and saying, "Excuse me, have you seen Jesus? Pardon me, have you seen my 12-year-old?" That they might have felt that they had egg, or excuse me, maybe matzah on their face. I'm sure they felt quite embarrassed at this point. So when they didn't find him, they went to Jerusalem. You think they were on their last nerve at about that point? Story of a young father in his supermarket. And he's got a holy terror, his son, strapped in the grocery cart. You probably have seen a scenario like this. And the couple was given a wide berth because as they were going down the aisle, the kid was trying to reach everything he could off the aisle and throw it out. Anything in the cart, he was pitching. And people were amazed because the dad seemed rather calm in the midst of this activity. And if you listen very carefully, you could hear the man murmur, "Steady, Donald. Be calm, Donald. Steady, boy. Keep controlled." Now, a woman had observed how this man under duress had controlled himself so very well and said, "You know how to speak to an upset child, quietly and gently." She then bends down into the cart and looks and says, "What's wrong, Donald?" The father interrupted and said, "Excuse me, I'm Donald. He's Henry." Do you think that maybe Joseph and Mary were talking to themselves after 3 days of trying to find Jesus? I think so. And when they find him in verse 46, where is he? Now,
Verse 46.
please discard everything you know about the Lord Jesus for just a moment. This isn't the man that has chosen 12 disciples at this point and has done miracles and has preached to the multitudes and has healed people, on and on and on. He's 12 years old. He had grown up in, if you will, Nazareth, a very obscure place, under the tutelage of his, if you will, dad, Joseph.
When I always am interested in when everybody started YouTube, when they came to this temple. So April 8, 2009. April 8, 2009 up until today is 12 years, 6 months, 26 days, 150 months. 153 months would be in another 3 more months. 666 weeks. What would 10 more weeks be from this point? Now, would you look at that? Look, ain't that something? How about that? January 12th, 2022. 11222 would be 666 weeks since Kim started his YouTube channel, and that would also come out to be hold on. That would be 12 years, 9 months, 4 days, excluding the date, 153 months. 153 is connected months. 666 weeks, 3.5 days, 1100, however you say that, 888 hours, 111,888 hours. 4662. If you just add 4 more days, it takes you to 4,666 days, 666 weeks, 4 days, 153 months, and on the 8th day, the circumcision. 12 years and 9 months, and 8 days, 4666. But if you go to the full 13 month, because even in the Jewish tradition is you get to like, as Jesus was known to be Jewish, that's at least what was said in the Bible. Jewish, and at the age of 13 you get that decision to stick with the roots of the covenant that's made at the age of 13 in order to stay with that system that happens with your body and the circumcision. So let's just say 13 years. You get to April 8th, 2022. And within 13 years, on this day, this is the first video I uploaded on YouTube. So I don't look at the day specifically when I joined YouTube, because I didn't make any content whatsoever. So I try to apply it to my first actual video upload, and it would be 1,832 days later, 5 years, 6 days, 60 months and 6 days to get to that point. 5 years on this YouTube platform. YouTube itself, YouTube is the headquarters of San Bruno, California. The service was created by 3 former PayPal employees in February 2005. And then Google bought it the very next year. So it sounds like somebody created it, and then Mr. Google and Mr. Giggles, I think they bought it. So far, since it started, not sure exactly what day, so let's go with it even. 6,111 days, 16 years, and 9 months. So on this YouTube platform, being played out as like the Bethlehem / Nazareth type of 12 years into the system since the YouTube platform started. 12 years in between 12 and 13. 12 years in, February 3rd, 2017. That's the 12th year. And then the 365 days from that point would be the focal point timeline in between February 2017 and February 2018. February 3rd, 2018 would be the first Jesus to be introduced into the YouTube platform. And then what happens is, say 3.5 some change years later, let's just put 42 months. August 3rd, 2021, around that area. And there may be some more time after that. I'm not certainly sure as to what it is. 662222. But from that time, I think somebody was picked to, or somebody who was already in play, not picked. The script has already been written out. Everybody's picked. And I think the first one may have been picked then. So then whoever's up next would be the next like 3.5 years or so later. But after the 12th year of YouTube's existence, I decided to upload my first video. And then up until today, seeing where I fit in with this timeline of what's been played out so far. Since I started, 1,676 days. And counting, 55 months and a day. 144 million hours. Figure it like this. Out of 144 million hours, I talked for 1/24 of that. So I took up, let's say, 1 hour each day. Sometimes I made 12 videos in a day. Other time, 33 minutes. Sometimes I just made one. But if you go with average and just divide it by 24, that would mean that I spoke for 6,033,600 hours. 6 million hours of that. 6 million hours. That's people were assigned to my channel. Even if it was the first reviewer, you had to listen to me for 6 million hours. I mean, seconds. I'm sorry, 6 million seconds. Where did I get hours from? If I take the actual hours itself, I couldn't imagine that being that much. I knew it sounded a little high. 42/24 divided by 24. All right, it's more realistic. 1,676 hours. 6 million. So basically 6 million seconds passes by that somebody is assigned to listening to. And then 1,676 hours. There's only 24 hours in a day. 24 hours in a day. Out of a week, if I talked every day for 24 hours straight, 72 of them would be the half the week, and then you still have 1,600 more hours to kill. So right now, Kim is in his 12th year, working on almost 666 weeks.
Mary comes, and she takes out some costly perfume. How do I know it's costly? The text says it's worth 300 denarii. 1 year salary.
For every reviewer.
I don't know if any of you have any, every once in a while somebody buys me some Calvin Klein. I'm going, hey, it's expensive, $50.
Calvin Klein, huh?
I don't have anything on my shelf worth $50,000 to $70,000, okay? I just don't, and if I did, I don't know if I'd be willing to spray it. That's how much it's worth. It was probably brought in from northern India.
So the title is When Joseph and Mary Lost the Son of God. How do you lose your child in the 12th year? When he's 12 years old. How do you lose your child when you're 12?
Kind of interesting. And she takes it, and she pours it over the feet of the Lord Jesus Christ, and she wipes his feet with her hair. See, the ultimate act for a servant, if you will, was to clean the feet, but there is even something lower than that, to unlatch one's sandal strap. We're going to learn about that with John the Baptist. She is wiping his feet with her hair in appreciation for what he's done. And there's Judas. Could not that money have been sold and given to the poor? I wonder even her own family if they kind of wondered, you know, that's the year. That was going to be my inheritance.
Yeah, that's a good point, because some people, they were promised that they're going to get this inheritance that's coming up.
She poured it out.
So she took your inheritance and was like, poured it out.
Acts chapter 4, second example. I think she was probably misunderstood by some. Poverty in Jerusalem. So what were the disciples doing who owned houses and lands? I'll tell you what they were doing.
They were selling them and giving because all that money that they made back then, all the disciples, I don't think they were all straight on the straight and narrow. I think they were all crooked. I think everybody Jesus hung out with was crooked. And so they, like, if you do it in modern day terms here, people's YouTube channel, because this is what it is, this temple here that was built by King Herod, this temple was destroyed in 70 AD, almost 42 months ago, the 70th year anniversary. This temple was being built.
They sold their houses, they sold their lands, they brought their money.
The only reason I think that they could sell them is because they were making money in order to get the land and the property and the homes, and that was the whole purpose of God doing that, allowing that to take place, because God just got everybody set up, everybody's set in exactly where they need to be in their place. And then he starts working through the Spirit in order to change their heart. That way, those that were following and contributing, they now fully contribute and start sharing everything with the apostles.
And they laid it at the feet of the apostles. Do you think there might have been a few relatives who might have got a little bit upset because my inheritance has now just been sold and given to poor people?
There you go.
Remember when Jesus was on the cross, my friends? And his brothers were not yet believing in him. And there was his biological mother, in a sense, because he was in the womb, okay?
What is the womb considered today? Planet Earth. Is there not two lands above us that intersect each other, and then in the middle is, you know, whatever you can birth out of it from the Inky and the Enlil side, and then in here is the womb?
He was born of a virgin, but he was in her womb.
Down here is the womb. And with the host body, before I forget, I don't know where it's mentioned that, but when you're the male, and then you do that thing where, like the reptilian race, they can reproduce. The sin that Jesus didn't commit, which is why he was sinless, according to what sin is the fact that he wasn't actually a son of man, but he became the son of man by adoption from, you know, Mary and Joseph. Even though they thought, you know, it was crazy. That's why the other guy came around, the rich guy, the one that wasn't his family member, but a next of kin, because you become the brother and the sister, mother and father, whoever you are, and you join the family. Blood is not thicker than spirit. Spirit's thicker than blood. The water itself is thicker than the blood, related. So when they came saying, Jesus, your mother and your father are outside, he's like, nah, the people that are here in my home are my mother and brother and father and sister and everything like that. So the host body system, in order to make that connect as well, would be the father that goes to the system, that gets a set of tennis shoes from YG, young G. They get their tennis shoes, they get their host body, they go from male to female. With them reproducing, with the womb that's made to withhold a child. That way a man can actually have a baby. When the baby comes out, say the baby's a son. Well, now, because you're the father and the mother, and that's your son, then it's your offspring, and you become that child's mother, and you become its father. And then the more you mix and breed together and keep it in the family, it mixes that DNA, and you can say that very thing, that now you yourself is also your own husband, your own wife, because you have been married together as one flesh. You get inverted, it becomes one flesh.
And he had a responsibility to take care of her. Now, Jesus could have turned to any of his half-brothers and said, you take care of mom. He didn't do that, did he? He said, John, this is your mom. Mom, this is your son. You know what Jesus had just done, everybody? He put the spiritual over even family.
Like, in other words, John, this is mom. Mom, this is your son, John. Nice to meet each other.
I pray we really take these things to heart. That about him and said, here are my mother and my brothers. For whoever does the will of God is my brother and my sister and mother. In other words, the relationships grow. When you have people that are obedient to the word of God, there is a kinship that occurs at that time. See, we think in terms of family, don't we? And it's right to think in terms of family. It says in 1 Timothy 5:8 that if someone doesn't provide for his own family, he's worse than an unbeliever.
Understanding of different characters in the Bible being the same character, just different stories, then you would understand that when it's not his time yet, it's also not his time to be crucified. Like the timing of it isn't yet. I've been focusing on Kim for 132 days, 4 months, and 10 days. So it took me from this point from the time I started YouTube, 4 years have passed. 2 months and 22 days. 50 months, 22 days. So in the 4th year, on the 2nd month and the 22nd day of the month, I had a desire to speak to Kim because he was being very blatant, at least according to my perception. And I was wondering, why was he talking like that about God?
The informational statement, Lord, the one you love is sick. Verse 4 goes on and says that when he heard this, Jesus said, the sickness will not end in death. No, it is for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it. And this is kind of strange language to our modern ears. And the reason it's a little bit strange is because Lazarus did die. In fact, when Jesus made that statement, he was already dead. He was already dead. He'd been dead for 2 days. He's going to lie in a tomb for another 2 days before Jesus even arrives. But
a day equals a year in the Bible. Sometimes the Bible teaches that a day can symbolize a year. 2 days, 2 years, and then waited another 2 more years.
I wanted that to be emphasized in our hearts and minds so that we'd be prepared for the next boom. It was, that next statement kind of comes at you like a boom. It just hits you, kind of like a truck, boom. He delayed. He delayed. He got the word that Lazarus was sick and he delayed. And that needs to be taken together. And that is so important because you and I...
It's like being someone's name being mentioned a couple years ago, and then you look at like, who isn't sick? Everybody's sick on this platform.
I have prayed many times, dear brothers and sisters in Jesus, many times you and I have prayed. We have prayed a prayer. We've cried out to God, and we have not found a ready answer. We have found a delay.
Back here, 2017, I was only up for 2 months and some change. And I'm not sure when I first came across Paul. Definitely within a year's time. I think I've come across everybody. I've seen them. And then I'll just focus on them later on. But Paul definitely sounds kind of irritated with this. A lot of disbelief in God. His prayers haven't been answered. And he just seemed like defeated.
And God has delayed. And He has not responded. He has not been immediately forthcoming in response to our prayers. And when that takes place, there is a subtle, and yet I think
November 3rd,
probably a natural inclination of our hearts, yours and mine, to begin to doubt God's attentive love. Have you ever come to God and said to Him, how long? How long is this going to happen? How long is this going to go on? How long am I going to have to continue to go through this? And you might say, what exactly was David going through? Well, he goes on and he talks a little bit about the struggles that he's having. Look what he says. Number one, we've already read, he says, will you forget me forever? He feels forgotten. Secondly, he says in the same verse 1, how long will you hide your face from me? He feels like God has turned away from him. And there's no...
So I feel like there's at least two Davids being played out, one on each end, depending on your understanding. But when he's saying David's like saying, how long do I have to put up with this? How long do I have to let my thoughts and be confused about this stuff? The ones playing the script out, how could they be confused when they know what the script is?
No longer even paying any attention. And then he says in verse 2, how long must I wrestle with my thoughts?
Wrestling with your thoughts. Well, I mean, I wrestle with my thoughts because trying to put everything together and listening to different people and understanding that there's this mandate that's going on, and some people might feel like that's a forceful thing because of the name, mandate. But that mandate is a man on a date. So there's women that are going on a mandate. And people are all going to be wrestling with your thoughts because of the direction you're being pulled one way or another. As I wrestle with my thoughts, I'm trying to just figure who's who and what role are they playing of everybody that comes into my life. What role is everybody playing? And no matter what role everybody's playing, there's always going to be tricks until it's over. So discerning is key. The power to stay still is also key. Not falling into temptation, another key. This mandate, they may be trying to set up a marriage to marry the man that they're dating. But so the script is David had 8 wives because he had his own wife. And even though it's similar to Christ was celibacy and never committed a sin his entire life. Even though the sin referred to about not murdering and not bearing false witness, like when you hop onto a platform, do not bear false witness to the people that you're preaching to. Do not be a murderer. So, but these 7, those 7 women, it seems like there's a mandate going on, And with that spirit itself, there's a marriage set up, but it's really to like marry Satan. But that's not the marriage. The marriage is a spiritual connection, and it has nothing to do with sexual, and it has nothing to do with a literal piece of paper you're going to like hug and kiss and have a matrimony ceremony. That's not how that is. Although I'm sure that was probably already played out, maybe once, maybe twice. Maybe we're going into the second time around. Okay, so February 14th, which is Valentine's Day. That makes sense. 2005. It was founded by 3 former employees of PayPal, Chad Hurley, Steve Chen, and Joel Karim. If these are the 3 founders, whatever the name really is, and there's 3 creators of YouTube, what was the whole purpose of creating YouTube? Obviously, to play out the end time Bible's prophecy. Right or wrong? So that's correct. So there's 3 people, like 3 unclean frogs. And at the same time, with this story,
here's how it unfolds. Verse 17. On his arrival, Jesus found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days.
All right, so if you take that as 4 years, I just like going to random people and listening to what they got to say that I haven't been paying attention to, because the signals will be easier to read, even from people like Kim before I focused in on them and everybody else. I feel like it's easier to read your signals back then, because now they've been kind of shown, so you got to switch it up a little bit.
All right, so from where Jesus was to where Lazarus was 1 day's journey. So the guy leaves with the message. He goes to Jesus. That's 1 day. Jesus waits 2 days. Takes him a day to go back. That's 4 days. You know what that means? Lazarus probably died before the messenger ever got to Jesus.
So he was already dead before Jesus even got the message. And this, with this being played out on YouTube, you got to take into account who's Lazarus, and with Mary and Martha, Mary's sister Martha, you have the 2, like you have the 2 at the top, and the same thing with even the landscape in Philly, where it's where this represents at least that the male is right here, and then the 2 females here. So if these were the 3 creators of YouTube, 3 unclean frogs, the purpose was to play out the end times prophecy with them. And each one of them can be considered Jesus, or God, or the Father, or the Son, or the women. Lucifer, the Lucifer race is being able to play both roles at the same time, becoming fully woman, fully man, and tricking everybody. So if Lazarus was raised from the dead, and then you have the Christ child being in the platform in between the 12th and the 13th year since YouTube started, the realistic time frame is 144 months later. 12 years in between this time, 2017, being in the temple up until the next year would be the 12th into the 13th year. You say from that point on, you got 12 years. And then it takes, because if he's in a temple teaching, and then it says 12 years old. there's 18 years of the Christ life that's missing. So if you look at it, the first 18 years, but if you start at the age of 30, and like if it's a legitimate 30 years old, and then from that point on, 30 years old, and then 12 years later, you would be 42 years old. Stepping into this platform here. But if you go anywhere from 4 years from that point on, from back in 2017, and then you got to wait 4 years for Lazarus to rise up, because the first 2 days, and then 2 days later, even on the anniversary of when Israel became a nation again, it's still in that time frame, 2017 and 18, depending on the 365 days from the 12th year to the 13th year of whoever's playing Jesus out. I think there's at least 3 of them, maybe 2 or 3, playing that role out. So within the 16 years, which is let me get this straight, between the 12th year and 365 days, from the time YouTube started, February 14, 2018. That would be the timing of Jesus coming into the temple, somewhere between 2017 and 18, February 14th, somewhere in that time. And then if you got the next 4 years, 4 days to raise up Lazarus, but that could also be between either 3 years and 365 days. So 365 is like floating around, which could be the next full year. If that was only 2 years. So it's like this. The Jesus into the system. He must have heard about Lazarus at least somewhere around February 14th, 2020, the beginning of the mask covering ordeal in the planet. Somewhere around that time there, in this system here, the Jesus that's being played out would have heard that message about Lazarus. And then 2 years later, because it's 16 so far altogether, 365, then the first 18 years altogether would be the lost years of Jesus, the first 18 years on the YouTube platform. I mean, since the YouTube platform started. The temple itself is already 16 years old, only 16 years old. So from the time that I was born into the womb, from the time I made my first video on YouTube, it took me 14,888 days to start speaking my mind on this platform and not know what the hell I'm getting myself into. But before this, the time when I went to jail for that year and a half, back on October 28th, 2004. I was 28 years old and 4 months. And then I wind up getting out March 19th, 2006. And before I went to jail, I had some experiences with God. Like one of them when my son was in the car, he was like 6 months old. I was coming back from Reading. I was on a turnpike in my Mustang. The tires weren't really good in the snow. I was driving on a turnpike. I spun out because it was snowing. My kid was in the back, and he was just sleeping. And here comes a tractor trailer in my direction. And I didn't know because it's snowing. Who knows how. Somehow I just like prayed to God to help me get out of it because I was like in my head. And then somehow my car backed up and went up on a little area where I can park aside. And then the truck driver drove up and then stopped and then moved up a little bit. But what he was doing was he started to move slow to let me know that he's plowing the narrow path in front of me. He's plowing it for me. And I winded up following him as I was sitting back in the car, like praying for God to help me. And then that's what happened with that guy. And for the next 15 miles or so, he plowed the way for me so I can drive home safe. And I get home and my kid's mom's arguing. I'm like, you don't even know what just happened. Like, I had an experience with God. Then another time I was driving my car and some drunken fool grabbed the back of my wing as I was going like 20 miles an hour. And he must have ripped his arms out of the socket. So I'm driving and he slows me down. I'm like, what the freaking clown? He slowed me down just enough for another car to get in front of me. And then as we're driving up, there's an intersection, but there's a green light on the other side of the road and a red light in front of you. But the green light looks like it's okay to go. And it was even confusing to my eye. But for that 5 seconds that he held me up, a car got in front of me, and that car got smashed into by another car head on. They were fine, but I don't know how I would have been, how they would have hit me 5 seconds if I was the one driving, because God used that clown to pull his arms out of his socket to slow me down in my car so I didn't get into the accident at that time. Not that I wished it on anybody else, but I seen that when it happened, they got out of the car real quick and they were fine. The airbags went off and they were just scared of her. But I had those moments. I always knew that God exists. It was a spirit. I never knew any of you guys, so I would never call somebody father. I would never call any of you as my father. And don't call me your father either. Don't try to trick me, because it ain't going to work. And I'm not having the worship of man. So from this point on, in the jail, I started to read the Bible. I went to 2 different jails. The second one, after 10 months, I had two other cellies, and they started to read the Bible inside. And this one guy used to come around every day, faithfully, to read the Bible for like a half hour for free. I'm like, hey, I can't. It's crazy you do it. Like, you're not even looking to get paid. And from that point on, I kind of started to get into it. And when I got out of jail, I lived with my brother-in-law for about 6 months. But I was driving back and forth to work, and he was married to my sister, and he just had this problem with stretching with his neck towards these women, like looking at him. And he's married to my sister, and I'm driving him to work. Hired him to work for me because I got my job back. And I'm like, Norm, you know, when you're lusting at the woman, you're already committing adultery in your heart because of with your eye. Oh man, he told me after that, you need to go find another place to live. So it was within about 3 days, I found a place in Bristol, PA, and I moved on my own, and I was out of there. But I was starting to preach the Bible, and I really didn't, it's not like I was skilled or anything, but when I started, I was 29 years old and 8 months on the outside with a little bit of knowledge of the Bible, a desire to walk it out. So from this point on, I started my ministry unknowingly right around almost 30 years old. So fast forward to my first video that I made on YouTube with a desire to do God's will. finally finding a platform to be able to speak these things that are in my head that I got to get out. It took 11 years, 14 days later. So from that point on, April 2nd, give me 365 days to get my feet wet, see what I'm doing, why am I here on this YouTube platform. And as of March 19th, from the time I got out of jail, was 12 years into my unknown walk of my ministry that I was creating without even knowing it. So 12 years from that time, I was already into...
Passover was supposed to have happened on April 1st of this year, on April Fool's.
March 9th, 10 days before my 365th day of my 12th year into this platform.
You know, let us fool you, because a fool deceives you. It's the same time that the Catholic Church and many other churches, the church age churchianity will be following Easter. Those have their kids running around looking for Easter eggs that they have died the night before.
Easter eggs that they have died the night before.
Not realizing the paganism that is attached to it, but the fact that they'll be doing it and saying they're doing it for Jesus. Now understand this, whenever the Passover came to Jesus, he was in the upper room with his 12 disciples.
So only 10 days before this experience, just this video alone, I was 11 months old in 7 days. So basically I was walking on my own. I was still stumbling, hitting, bumping into stuff. Still trying to, I was still on the milk, weaning off, getting on the food. And I've encountered before my 12th month, I guess number 12 being there's 12 hours in a day when you walk in the light, walk in the daytime.
Verse 22. Now the feast of the unleavened bread drew nigh, which is called
the feast of the unleavened bread. Watch out for the unleavened bread of the Pharisees. Yeah. Watch out.
Passover. And the chief priests and the scribes sought how they might kill him, for they feared the people. The religious people, the Sadducees and the Pharisees, were looking to kill Jesus, seeking his life. Wow. A man of God teaching you truth. People who are religious were looking to kill him, crucify him, to end his life. You know, they stalked Jesus. Wherever he went, they stalked him. They followed him. They watched his every move. Sorry, guys.
I can't
They
believe
watched his every move.
Look, everybody got over on me back then, putting me in that category.
They looked on how they
First
were able to
time
steal
around.
him and kill him. And what did they have to happen to him? What had to happen? My brother Rob has been talking about this on his channel.
And it's amazing to me that that whole story reminded him of me for some reason. After almost a year, after 12 months. So when 12 months came around, that Passover, it's 365 days. Boy, did I, after 52 weeks in a day, or, after 52 weeks, I got to taste what it's like to get the knives out of my back. I didn't realize that it hurt with so many people stabbing me like that. For what? What was the purpose? And then it didn't stop from that point on. They continued on. You guys continued on. And then it just brought more and more people. And then more and more and more. And it's just insane how if you can't see what's going on, where one person can grab the attention of all types of people and just, you know, to attack and then still just keep moving. Harold gave me and helped me with the spiritual understanding of all. This is back when I was still deceived by SJD. 14 months into this YouTube world, having conversations with, you know, the poor suffering servant and all of his employees. I mean, you know, people that he happened to know. So as you take a look here, you see Kim is already in my vision. He's in my peripheral vision, which means I've watched him. John from the Great Watchman of that day, and even this guy down here, which kind of does Kim stuff too. I periodically watched them, and I trusted nobody whatsoever. Everybody I looked at as being basically judging them without getting to know them. But I had Kim in my view back in July 2nd, 2018.
He's glorified through this particular miracle. So you look at this particular miracle, you know, you have what Jesus is trying to reveal to you. He tells the apostles, you know, he gets down to verse 14, he told them, Lazarus is dead, and for your sake, I'm glad I was not there so that you may believe. You say, wait a minute. The apostles, they already believed in Jesus. What's Jesus meaning when he says that you may believe? There's more for them to understand. There's more to Jesus than what you already know.
So after 4 years, 4 days, 4 years, Lazarus was raised from the dead. But when was the 4 years ago? Did it begin on the new year of 2018? And we're coming up, and on the 4th actual year itself? Now, who knows? These are all just questions, throwing stuff. Whatever sticks is going to stick over here. Whatever doesn't is going to fall off over there. Whoever bites on that, chew on that for a while, and then let me know. And then if this makes sense to somebody over here, then, but if it's not, then I would hope to be led in the direction where I can understand when all this took place. But these are all just mathematics. I'm not saying anything besides showing mathematics. This is when these people, I've started to pay attention. This is what happened with me in my life. This is where I grew up. This is what I did, how I turned to God. After 28 years of living, I finally turned to God. And then when I got out, I started my ministry somewhere around the age of 30. And then I went searching and looking how to tell people with what I know, and I wind up getting kicked out of my house because my brother didn't like me telling him to stop lusting after women. When you're at least with me, I mean, it's disrespectful. So it would be like, it's the same thing. Is it a sin to look at someone? No, it's not. But what are you doing as you're looking? And then what is it that you're thinking about? And how long does it happen for? And then you start to drift into that. And I was asking to be respectful about it. Just like if anybody else that struggles with a sin that you were told not to do, but then you did it. And this is the reason why, because God knew that once you turn to him, you're going to struggle with the sin that you did, and then the sin is hiding it and then judging somebody else and saying thou shalt not touch, when what's going on inside of you is a hidden secret or what comes out of you is a beast that you're riding on, and you have to deal with that. But like I said, when people have to handle their business, they handle their business with whatever it is they do. And then if you feel like you're doing something wrong, you can ask God to forgive you and repent from it. But if you're already here and you've already made your decision and you've already done what you've done, that's part of life now. The sin was doing it, going against God's will, and then condemning people for doing that, touching their tree of life, getting people to interpret it that way and have them go in that direction. But because it's over and done with, it's over and done with. Just like as a human being, a regular man, just like with a regular woman, you have your desires with whatever it is that you do, and who's to tell you that you can't do what you want to do? You learn how to go about it and go free will, and then you see what the free will does. And then you see how the other part of the free will is, why does God allow all this stuff to happen? Because he's not a God of forces. He has to allow it to happen. What choice does he have? The only thing he does is he'll just reveal secrets to those that are in the highest positions, and then they start to change, and then they start to retrain their employees in order to start loving people instead of attacking them and condemning them with doing that thing but what's done in secret is being hypocritical. That's the sin. Stop doing that. What's done is done. It's part of your life now, and you just move on from it. You handle what you got to do with your business, and then come fully clothed in your right mind and have a conversation.
Son of God came to do, this is it. God came to die for you. He's glorified at the cross. So when Jesus says this sickness will not end in death, it's for God's glory, so that the Son of Man might be glorified or crucified. It was like Jesus knew that if he went down there and raised Lazarus back to life, it was going to be such a spectacular ministry that it was going to be the straw that broke the Pharisees' back.
So whoever Lazarus is in this system here, it doesn't matter which person may be playing it out, singularity or whichever three. Either way, Lazarus has been raised from the dead, and those that are from the inside, you know who Lazarus truly is being played out, and you see that he's been risen from the dead.
They were just going to look at that and say, man, we cannot deal with this Jesus anymore. He's got to be crucified. We got to kill this guy. In fact, it says it in 11:53 that after he did this, from that moment on, they began to plot to kill his life. It's like Jesus said, I know if I go do this ministry, it's going to cost me my own life, but I'm going to do it anyway. 12 baskets of leftovers. It's like, man, we got all this plus leftovers. He's always just exceeding expectations. He puts them in a storm, they almost die. How's he save them? He walks to them on the water. I mean, you could have just sent me a boat out here, but not Jesus, man. He's always exceeding expectations, like the Gerasene demoniac.
When you exceed expectations, you're walking on the water to get to the people. And then when you're feeding the, 5,000 or however many, with a few loaves of bread and a couple of fish, the 2 fish can feed 5,000 people just with the truthful information. And that's how you feed. That's where the miracle comes from, of just feeding people the truth. It has nothing to do with little bread.
At the start of the story, running around out of his mind, naked. At the end of the story, he's sitting down at the feet of Jesus, clothed and in his right mind. And they
A lot about warfare and to watch out for the enemy. But then it also came to a point where I believe this is going to be needed to balance it, and also that we couldn't forget. This is very important. It's Philippians chapter 4. I would like to talk to you about a special person that I met. The way that I'm going to preach is kind of somewhat different, just a little bit. But I would like to
for you to meet a very special person. Now, this person, actually, he went through harder times than I did. He went through a lot of suffering and trials. However, he was truly happy, and I never really quite understood that. So then I took some time to talk to this person, and then he told me a few tips that I think would be a blessing to you. All right, so I would like for you to meet this special person. His name is Mr. Glad.
I'm reading it, but I've obviously read this passage of Scripture a few times, and I was reading it the other day. I came across this John chapter 4, verse 11. From time to time when you talk to people, people will be offended when I say that Jesus Christ is God's Son. He's God himself in the flesh. And they'll say to me, I don't believe that. They say, Jesus never once himself said that he was God's Son. That people said, other people said that about him, and he alluded to it, but he never said that himself. Well,
they were always trying to trap him, and on top of that, he didn't have to say anything like that because actions are what speaks louder than words. The actions showed who he was.
If someone ever says that to you, you just take them here to John chapter 11, verse 4, where Jesus speaking says, this sickness will not end in death. No, it's for God's glory, so that God's Son, me, because he's the one that's getting ready to do the miracle, so that God's Son may be glorified through it.
How many people don't talk in the third? I mean, how many people talk in the third person?
See, what Jesus wants to do is do something in such a way that he, Jesus, God's Son, is glorified, made known, recognized. The wages, effect of that sin is death. And when Jesus...
The wages of that sin is a dead sheep.
Effect of sin on his friend Lazarus, man, that it had killed him. He was in a grave. He just becomes indignant. Why? Because this is what Jesus came to take on, was sin. See, the power of Satan is the greatest power this world has ever seen. There's no mankind could ever overcome death, no matter how smart, brilliant you are. Nobody can overcome death, right? Because it's Satan's power. He's got sin, death, and hell. That's his power. Jesus Christ comes down and says, man, I'm taking on... He said, I've had about enough of this death business. Now I've had about enough of this sin business. Let's roll away the stone, man. Me and Satan's fixing to go toe-to-toe right here. Me and him's going to do battle right here over this deal. My friend Lazarus, roll away the stone, because we're getting ready to go toe-to-toe, and I'm getting ready to put Satan on notice that his time's up, man, that the real champion has showed up, and about a week from today, man, his power is going to be completely broken, and I'm going to prove it today.
I imagine that, a week from today. November 3rd, 2021, 8:39 p.m. This video was back in March 26, 2018. And this is about raising Lazarus from the dead. Obviously, Lazarus was an important figure into that system, because once people realized that Lazarus rose up from the dead, I think they also wanted to kill him.
Roll away stone. Oh, can't roll away the stone, man. He might smell bad. Did I not tell you I am the resurrection and the life? If you believe in me, man, you'll see the glory of God. Roll away the stone. We're fixing to do some business. And they roll away the stone, and Jesus called out in a loud voice, Lazarus. You see, Lazarus' problem is your problem. Everybody in this room, because we're all sinners, we're all spiritually dead. And therefore, we don't have the power to be good enough to get to heaven. We don't have the power to respond to Jesus, because we're all dead.
But he becomes the Son of Man, the Son of Mary, Son of Man, fully human. And he does that in order that he can be the perfect Savior.
So he becomes the Son of Man, the Spirit, which is adopted. It hits Mary first. It hovers over Mary, the mother, the one that gives birth to that Spirit publicly, although the Spirit doesn't have, already has a mother and father, like an earthly mother and father, but in the system, that's when the mother and the brothers will come and say, hey, Jesus, and then he's saying that my family is anybody who does the will of God, who would be the next of kin.
The one who's an example to us, the one who's sympathetic to us, but the one supremely who can save us by his supreme act of humility. As you look at that this morning, as we look at it together, let's worship him. Do you want to worship him? Do you want to praise him? Do you want to thank him for what he's done? Do you want to bow at his feet in humility and say, I want to be a... He grows in favor with God and with man. Experienced, he did not sin.
What's your definition of sin? Masturbation? Thou shalt not touch? Was that what people were told was a sin? They told you that way you can commit the sin and then be trapped in a host body. Because the reason why they told you that is because Satan, which is a spirit that works through the children of disobedience, was running those groups of people that did that thing and made it happen with the host body and came down here from the literal heaven as well. Came down here and did that. And then would start to blame other people and commit and say that they're sinning because of it. And meanwhile, they had it hidden inside of them. Cheating. Hiding. Nobody knows. Yo, you shall not touch that. Look at me. I'm an angel. I'm an angel. I built my wall. See? But you're sealed up inside like an alien. And that's what the dead sheep, that's why the wages of sin is death, because it's a dead sheep system that takes place. So Christ didn't actually have that done, therefore he wasn't committing that sin. And then towards the end, the reason why he was crucified again is because he didn't accept anything that went against the will of God, which is just agreeing, yes, Father, it's you. I am your son, and you're my Father. Many people do pray to a Father, God in heaven, because that person gave them the whole world. It wasn't just one Jesus type going up to the high mountain. It was anybody that was offered that deal, accepted it, and said, hell yes, I will accept that.
He grows in favor with God and with man. As a man, he's not overbearing, he's not arrogant, but he's popular. He's subject to his parents, he's living to please them, he's working hard. He's a good son, even though his parents didn't understand who he was. He was a good brother, he was a good neighbor, he's a good worker. He's a growing man and he's a good man. But because of his perfection, he is able to both represent us and redeem us. So he's a perfect saviour, and we're reminded of that as we think about his humanity. But also, he's a sympathetic one. He knows what it is, as that passage in Hebrews told us, to be human. He can sympathise with all the experiences that you go through as a child and an adult. Do you feel pain? He felt pain. Do you feel temptation to sin? He felt pain. Do you feel temptation to be angry, to lust, to lie, to steal, to long for things that are not yours? He felt that. Do you feel the frustration of living in a world that's busted up and broken and fractured and frustrating? He felt that too. Every feeling Jesus experiences except sin. He's sympathetic. Now, it's obvious that he didn't play every single sport. He didn't go through every single experience. He doesn't play every instrument. He didn't give birth himself. So there are things perhaps you could say which are unique, but...
So there you go. He didn't give birth. As he was mentioning sin, and so the birth, woe to those who are pregnant in those days, because what's getting ready to happen is, in the male-female system, if your mind has been converted as to what's going on, and you're giving birth, that's where you're going to struggle with what you're going to be bringing into this world, which would be a son of man, daughters of men, sons of man. You're bringing in your own creation, if that's a reality. Again, I don't truly know, but it seems like it is. Parthenogenesis. Why else would Clark be showing me all this? I didn't ask him to.
Being clad completely in the human body of an earth dweller, I had to fight all the passions of human nature in order to free myself from this and, spiritualized, return once more to whence I had come. Like every child, I had to improve my soul gradually, develop my concepts and opinions in order to adapt to my spirit, the soul I had breathed unto myself, so that at the end of my earthly career I could show my spirits how I brought back not only my own spirit in all its magnitude, but also knew how to spiritualize my human soul.
Earthly career. Not that he goes and lives in heaven, but the earthly career is on earth itself, in this system called earth. That was the career. So at the end of his career, his earthly career, then it began the heavenly spiritual ascension, where he also said, I must be about my Father's business. He also said to Mary, don't cling to me, I haven't ascended to my Father yet. Don't cling to me, I haven't ascended to my Father yet. And then he's telling his mother and his father, his adopted mother and father in the system, that he must be about his Father's business in the 12th year, in between the 12th up to the 13th year before he ascends to the Father to do his Father's business.
I think that it's very possible. When Jesus uses this expression, he's basically saying, did you not know I needed to be in my Father's house? The implication is doing his business, but he still needed to be in his Father's house. And you know,
the combination of the story, hey, Jesus, your mother and your brother and your father, I think, everybody's outside. And that's when he said, whoever does the will of God is my mother, brother. In other words, like, even you're trying to say that that's who you are, your father and brother. The water is thicker than blood because it's a spirit. Then at the same time, when the mother and father, when he's in a temple and he's telling them that he must be about his Father's business. And that's why he's saying that to them, to let them know who his real Father is. Even though they've adopted him, the stepfather adopted him. But with the mother, your mother and your brother's outside, he said it's kind of in a way just to let them know who his real mother is, who his real brothers are, who his real next of kins are.
where we're going to find Jesus even later on? In Luke chapter 4, on a weekly basis, he went to synagogue. He has done miracles and has preached to the multitudes and has healed people, on and on and on. He's 12 years old. He had grown up in, if you will, Nazareth, a very obscure place, under the tutelage of his, if you will, dad, Joseph. Having learned the skill of carpentry, maybe masonry?
Maybe. Not per se like building blocks in a literal sense, but yeah, as a mason, being a master builder, of course he dabbled in masonry and dabbled with hanging out with the masons.
And there the parents come back, and he's sitting with the teachers. And not only is he listening to them, but he's asking them questions.
I don't care. I don't care. But you're chasing after fool's gold. All right? And in the end, he's going to be slain. He will. I guarantee it.
Meaning me.
So, this is just the tip.
Robin's lies about Elijah sickens me.
Process that's getting ready to start.
I can't stand that he's interpreting it correctly.
And in the end, guess what? The false prophet pushing another false prophet, giving life to the dead.
Meaning me and Harold Camping, truly meaning that I'm giving life to the dead because I gave life to him.
Over there, okay, who was a false prophet. He died a false prophet.
It began back then. Just keep in mind.
Did he lose? Elijah himself didn't actually do the destroying, the blood destruction. It was the man of Israel that followed Elijah. That the man of Israel that followed it up. The 450 priests of Baal.
Sounds dumb. Has God ever said anything to you or shown you something in His Word that sounded dumb? That just didn't make any sense to you at all? Yeah? I'm just giving you a minute to process that. How about when he came along and he said, oh, you know that person that you hate? I want you to love them. I don't know, that doesn't make any sense, God. I'm sorry, that just doesn't make a lick of sense.
Does it make sense now?
Jesus goes on here in verse 9, and he answered them, are there not 12 hours of daylight? A man who walks by day will not stumble, for he sees by this world's light. And what Jesus is doing is he's basically answering the specific fear that the disciples had. They were fearful that going back to Judea was going to be a dangerous situation, and they had good reason to believe that.
Which is his word.
To set up his kingdom, it's not by his own power just like that. It's by power that's already in place, settled for him.
So if you count the number of his name, and it's Cain, and the mark is the birthmark, and with representing the system starting up over in California as of April 2nd, 2009, with Kim speaking about signaling being the Antichrist, the ones getting ready to take over. 666 weeks in from the time that he started is the new year, 2022. And because it's 12 years, being like in the system where Jesus was in a temple, how does this play out? Jesus in a temple at the age of 12, speaking to everybody, but it also gives a 9-month period of a birth.
It's just like you. And those of you who are struggling and saying, man, it's hard to serve God, and Jesus knows exactly what you're going through. It's hard to be single, and then, try to live separately from the opposite sex and then not live together with the opposite sex before marriage. And Jesus knows that. John chapter 1. He lived by himself, and he had no relationships with the opposite sex over there.
Over there.
So, see, he made sure that he stayed as a clean testament. He didn't use any of the
over there
excuses like some of you Christians would. We're going to look at John chapter 1 and then verse 39.
So when I first started YouTube, I mean, from the time I was born to the time I made my first video, it took me 40 years in the wilderness and 9 months, like a birth, and then 5 days later, 14,888 days since birth, to start to get tortured, you know, like to death on the platform. I'm 45 years old. I'll be 46. 2022, June 28th. That'll be 6 years of this thing that's going on in this womb. Then from the time that I was born to the time of going into jail for a year and a half and then getting out was 29 years old, 8 months, 19 days. So I was almost 30 years old when I started to get into teaching and understand what it's like to try to talk about God and Jesus and how uncomfortable it is with other people and what you go through.
I'm going to go ahead and launch it off because I don't have time, all right? So let me read it quickly. Now, another thing about Jesus' childhood that we do know is that he did live independently, all right? When he reached the age, just like everybody who's normal, he reached an age that was independent and he can live off by himself because he didn't start his ministry until 30, okay? So he lived off by himself.
And at the same time, Kim is 33 and a half, I believe he said.
He lived independently, and then he worked a normal job like many of you. And then what was his living? His living was carpenter. Like a hug, or there's like a greeting that I haven't seen you for a long time, or hey, cousin. Because keep reading here. He treats him like God. In verse 30, this is he of whom I said, after me cometh a man, which is preferred before me, for he was before me. And I what?
So before me could mean also before me, like before my face, in front of me. Or it can also mean before me was him.
Knew him not. There's your next clue. Jesus Christ and John the Baptist, even though they were related, they didn't meet each other.
So they never touched tips, and he never knew him with this host body system set up. He never knew him that way either.
All that time. So he didn't have a childhood with John the Baptist then.
And a childhood, having the children hidden in a hood, he never had that childhood either.
John the Baptist, even though they were related, they didn't meet each other all that time. So he didn't have a childhood with John the Baptist then.
So they didn't meet each other, and there was no childhood. There was no child being. He didn't have a
childhood with John the Baptist.
He didn't have a child with John the Baptist. He didn't have a childhood either.
Keep reading verse 31. But that he should be made manifest to Israel. Therefore am I come baptizing with water. Verse 33. And I knew him not. He repeated that again.
So do you think that when Christ was walking the earth and he was going through these temptations, do you think that there was a make-pretend 40-day period of people pretending to be his disciples, pretending to be like, Lord, Jesus, pretending to be that way? Do you think he had to go through that first? I think so. Because I think that's what the 40-day process is all about. And also being tested in the wilderness for 40 years. 40 years, the wilderness, you're in like no man's land anywhere. And then you can hop on to a platform around that age and then start to go into other people's homes. Because now you're going into their home. And then you're talking to them at night.
But he that sent me to baptize with water. Then that shows right here that when Jesus Christ was born, that Mary and Elizabeth and John the Baptist, they weren't close with each other.
Mary, Elizabeth, and John the Baptist, not close with each other.
And John the Baptist knew that Jesus is God. He didn't.
Again, you keep throwing that thing out there. He's never said that. It's what you said. It's what they said. It's what he said. It's what she said. Whatever you say he is what he's going to be to you.
He didn't know who the Messiah was or who God is. It was kept secret all that time. Maybe Elizabeth knew about that because she talked about the mother of my Lord, so to speak. She worded it that way when she met Mary. But then after that, it went AWOL. After that, there was not much attention after that. Why? Because if you don't, you will combine all the verses together as one and come up with wrong doctrine and crazy, kooky stuff that Jesus Christ had dealing with the Essenes. That's what you end up with without dispensationalism.
And then when you deal with the people with the Dead Sea Scrolls, it would be people that normally mention the Dead Sea Scrolls and start to read from it. And the missing sentences, the missing, supposedly the pages are missing, but it's not that. It's just they have the Dead Sea Scrolls written, and it's like a future fulfillment. They have to fill in the words. They got to fill in between the lines what's taking place. So when John the Baptist and Jesus mingled with the Essenes and then with the Dead Sea Scrolls, it was a way to fulfill Scripture.
How does dispensationalism answer it? I'll tell you how it answers it. The reason why is because when Jesus Christ said, I came not to give peace but a sword, and he knows he comes down as conquering king, is because that's his second coming.
Second coming means he already died. But he never really actually did die because he rose up from the dead.
And his second coming is after he dies on the cross. He comes in as humble, lowly, peaceful Jesus Christ. And then when he stamps out the government, sets up as King of Kings, Lord of Lords, those teachings that he taught, that's applied to his second coming.
So Kim is here. This is the second coming.
It's that simple. The historians have wondered, could Jesus Christ and John the Baptist then, they met each other in the wilderness, and could they have come across the Essenes who were in charge of the Dead Sea Scrolls? So there's
down here with Israeli News Live, also a production of the Noon Institute. Of course, today is August 8th, 2021. I actually rarely ever speak about what the date is, but this time we're going to make sure we do it. On your screen, Daniel 9, the Messiah the Prince, the famed 70 weeks timeline that so many of us refer to and have believed that this is a prophecy yet to be fulfilled, or at least in part. Daniel's chapter 9 has partially not been fulfilled. And those of you that have followed our ministry for years know that I also taught this and only have discovered in the last couple of years that many of those prophecies, whether it be Obadiah, Zechariah, Zephaniah, so many of these prophecies actually had been fulfilled. And no, I'm not a preterist. I know they have their own doctrine on things. People actually asked that in the beginning. I didn't even know about this group or what they believed. Mine was more inspired from a sister Jennifer, that told my wife one day, have Brother Steve read the prophecy talking about the 10 men will take a hold of him that is a Jew, take a hold of his garment, have him read that in the Hebrew language.
For the Antichrist,
which is his word,
to set up his kingdom, it's not by his own power just like that. It's by power that's already in place, settled for him. It's did right. Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Joseph. So notice right here that they say that Jesus of Nazareth, he comes from Nazareth. And look how Nathanael responds at verse 46. And Nathanael said unto him, there are so many good things that can there any good thing come out of Nazareth? Look how Nathanael responds at verse 46. And Nathanael said unto him, there are so many good things that can there any good thing come out of Nazareth? Why? Because Nazareth is a place of silence, no place of attention. But if they said, oh yeah, what if Philip said, Jesus came from England, the land of Druids, and you know what Nathanael would do? Whoa, let me see what this guy has to say.
Take a hold of a Ish Yehudi, a Jewish man. The only part that's plural is when it says, and we will go with you, for we hear God is with you.
All of that is just fairy tale nonsense. Jesus, where did he grow up in? You got to realize he didn't go to England. The Bible actually shows when he grew up at Isaiah 53 verse 2, it was a place of silence. Wait, how did he get the attention of Druids then? How did he get...
Growing up in silence is basically studying, listening, watching, in silence, learning, thinking, praying, discerning.
But the point is here, that I put my wording here, is that for the Antichrist to set up his kingdom, it's not by his own power just like that. It's by power that's already in place, settled for him. Wait, how did he get the attention of Druids? How did he get the attentions of the entire culture at England and get them to convert? When the even was come, there came a rich man of Arimathea named Joseph, who also himself was what? Jesus' disciple. So it's important to understand that Joseph of Arimathea was Jesus' disciple. Now look at the book of Matthew 13.
Now, which means Paul really wasn't, right? Paul wasn't actually a disciple. I look at Paul more as being the 13th. He has the 12. They all looked up to him as like the Christ. But at the same time, John the Baptist also had a similar take on that, because they kind of looked at him as the Christ as well. But Joseph was one of his disciples, but none of his family, none of Christ's family actually believed him. They didn't believe in him. The prophet is without honor in his own home, his own country, his own place. So with Joseph being his great uncle, then, but yet he was a disciple. And unlike Judas, Judas wasn't, because Judas was replaced. So Joseph was the one that came and took the body of Christ at the cross.
Matthew 13. So he believed in Jesus' teachings. He believed what Jesus preached and taught. And he was a supporter of Jesus' ministry. Well, look at Matthew chapter 13. Jesus' teachings. He believed what Jesus preached and taught. And he was a supporter of Jesus' ministry. Well, look at Matthew chapter 13. Look who didn't support Jesus' ministry. Look at verse 54.
You can support it by being a financial donation to the ministry, or you can support it not even donating to the ministry, because Judas was involved with the money exchanging. So he was part of it. He had his hands in it with the money, the situation, as the one that's going to take over, because and he expected Christ to take over the Roman Empire, but he did it behind the scenes instead of actually literally doing it. So Judas was part of the money exchange. He supported, I'm sure, Christ's ministry, but was he really supporting it?
And when he was come into his own country, he taught them in their
54 is a key number.
Synagogue, insomuch that they were astonished and said, look who didn't support Jesus' ministry. Look at verse 54. And when he was come into his own country, he taught them in their synagogue, insomuch that they were astonished and said, whence hath this man this wisdom and these mighty works? Is not this the carpenter's son? Is not his mother called Mary, and his brethren? Verse 56, and his sisters. Verse 57, and they were offended in him. But Jesus said unto them, a prophet is not without honor, save in his own country and in his own house. Now look at Mark.
Look at that little house. It's like looks like a little studio or something.
Mark 6.
I think that's why Click built that. You built that little spot out there to represent that little house. I mean, I built this thing here, but I built this just because I was going to make my hoods. I made an extension from the shed. And then I joined YouTube, and I started to use this as a little studio.
Now I'm going to read this quickly because I don't have time. So I'm just going to go over there and then read it quickly. Christ was, they accuse us of being too stiff, too formal, too spiritual, non-worldly, because that was Jesus' attitude. Now here's the thing, there's nothing wrong with having fun, games, and laughter, or being, what do you want to call it, cool to your level. There's nothing wrong with doing these things as long as it's not anti-spiritual and anti-scriptural. There's nothing wrong with these things, okay? So I'm not putting down on those things, but when you call us stiff, too formal, too spiritual, and stuff like that, you got to realize that was Jesus' life. Okay, so let me give some clues here. One is pretty simple. When you read Jesus' conversations or Jesus Christ when he interacted with people in the Bible, you see that he was usually a serious type of person. Now, maybe he did some jokes here and there because we see that in the Bible, God does have a sense of humor. So that can be in his nature, all right? So Jesus Christ, he does have that, but mostly it's serious, it's formal, and he's always spiritual. That's the thing about Jesus Christ. In college and in school or whatever education, studying very hard, criticized by people close to him for being weird and non-worldly. And then he was like you, studying in college and in school or whatever education, studying very hard. Why? Luke chapter 2, he increased in wisdom, stature. He worked at a job. He had social relationships with people where he had to maintain a good resume, a good testimony in the workplace among his landlords and the city and the inhabitants around him. Why? Luke
when you read his text.
Chapter 2, well favor with God and man. But he wasn't like, sociable and so talkative. He was considered to be weird, just a normal person.
You almost sound like you know him.
Spiritual about the things of God. And it's hard to serve God, and Jesus knows exactly what you're going through. It's hard to be single, and then, try.
Single yourself.
Try to live separately from the opposite sex and then not live together with the opposite sex.
Living together with the opposite sex is you're a male, you become female. You're a female, you become male. You're now living with the opposite sex.
Marriage, Jesus knows that. John chapter 1. He lived by himself.
Singularity, by yourself, as non-host body. You didn't give birth. You didn't commit that sin.
And he had no relationships with the opposite sex over there.
over there he didn't have a relationship with the opposite sex over there. I'm sure he could have back then when he was walking among the prostitutes and the tax collectors and all them, ones that everybody was like saying stay away from because they're evil.
So see, he made sure that he stayed as a clean testimony. He didn't use any of the excuses like some of you Christians would. He made sure that he stayed as a clean testimony. He didn't use any of the excuses like some of you Christians would. Jesus Christ, he knows every struggle you go through. Why? Because the Bible said so. You just didn't pay attention.